Welcome on stage Daniel and his guest, Chung, principal at NEA, and David Uffer, senior partner at Alira Health.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I just want to welcome everybody. My name is Daniel Teo, a managing partner for Hunniwell Lake Ventures, and welcome to this roundtable on intelligent surgery. We're privileged today to be joined by Chung from NEA and David Uffer from Alira Health. And the format today will start with a brief discussion between the panelists to introduce the subject, but in the second half of this 30-minute session, we'd like to hear from the audience. Any questions or comments that you may have or you might like to make. And to ensure that everyone has, there's time enough for everyone, I would ask that you keep your questions or comments short, 30 to 60 seconds tops, so that we can have an opportunity to hear from everyone. You may begin to post your comments in the Q&A section of the webinar now, even as we continue on this program. Before I begin, I just want to say that intelligent surgery is probably not only one of the most exciting things to happen in the field of surgery in decades and possibly centuries, but it is also timely. While there have been many advances in many areas of our lives, particularly in computing and data and telecommunications, and some modest advances in the surgery suite, many of the tools that we're still using today in surgery are absolutely medieval. I mean, my cellular phone here has got more computing power and intelligence than many of the hardware that we have today in surgery. Now, the good news is that there is a wave, a tsunami of innovation that's in the pipeline, one that's going to change the face of surgery as we know it over the next decade. And a lot of this development comes on the back of other enabling technologies, like computing power, breakthroughs in material science and engineering. And these are the innovations that are going to help us make surgery more accessible, safer, and effective. So to discuss these exciting developments, I now invite the panelists to introduce themselves and the work that they do in this space, starting perhaps with Chung from NEA.
Daniel, thanks so much. Nice to meet everyone, and thanks so much for the opportunity. I'm a principal at NEA. NEA is a larger venture capital firm that's been around for over 4 decades. We have over 20 billion under management over that period of time. In March, we raised NEA 17, which is a $3.6 billion fund. Half the monies go to tech, half the monies go to healthcare. Within healthcare, there are 3 verticals: biopharma, services, and medical devices. And I'm very firmly within medical devices. I've been here for about 2.5 years now. I was previously at another firm called Medtech. And then before that, I was an entrepreneur, like many of you, co-founded a company called Lexington Medical. Before that, I was in big corporate for about a decade in cardiovascular and ophthalmology, Edwards Life Sciences, AMO, Bausch & Lomb, and then I have an engineering MD and MBA background. So really, thank you so much for the time. Look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Tuck. David Uffer, Alira Health.
Thanks, Daniel. I've been in medtech for now 30 years this year. Most of my career has been spent in the areas of strategy and business development in large cap medtech companies. I started with Abbott Laboratories. I spent 6 years with Boston Scientific in interventional medicine and oncology, Hologic in corporate development and women's health. I have had time in neurosurgery and neuromonitoring, and my last stop was with Medtronic by way of Covidian, and about 30 different product categories with $5 billion of revenue, leading business development there. I joined Alira Health 3 years ago. We're a global service provider with offices across Europe and the US, and we help clients along the way of medical affairs with the full regulatory and CRO clinical services. We are strategy advisors and corporate and business unit, and then we do on the product level strategy in health economics and market access. And finally, we are investment bankers, and we lead transactions in the mid-market from $20 to $200 million enterprise value. We do that both in medtech and pharma, biopharma.
So really almost a full service provider, David.
Correct.
Well, thank you very much, Dave and Tuck. So, today's topic is about intelligent surgery, and that word may mean different things to different people. For instance, at Hunniwell, we're looking at innovation that makes surgical instruments smarter and communicate with each other. surgical innovations that help our surgeons see, treat, and heal. C refers to the various surgical, interoperative visualization and navigation technologies, as well as novel point-of-care diagnostics that are non-invasive or minimally invasive, non-radioactive. Treat refers to different treatment modalities like radiofrequency, microwave, laser, ultrasound, as well as some of the more esoteric technologies like cryo and plasma. And in heal, we refer to wound closure, tissue healing, and tissue reinforcement technologies. And somewhere in there also is home and portable dialysis. So these are the areas that we are interested in and which we define as intelligent surgery. So I'm just curious, Dave and Tak, how do you look at intelligent surgery? What does that mean for you? Maybe let's start with Dave.
For us, intelligent surgery goes beyond just the actual device. For us, it's the perioperative procedure. So we look at pre-surgical planning and processes to bring a patient into the OR, the interoperative processes that would lead to better outcomes and more efficient procedures, and of course, the post-operative patient monitoring and care that leads to the better outcomes. So in general, that is all the perspective that we try to keep on having an intelligent surgery. When it comes to the technologies in intelligent surgery around products, we want to see the inclusion of advanced sensors and advanced diagnostics and monitoring technologies that have either biofeedback or some type of advanced system that will give you either point in time information or post-procedural information based on what is going to be better efficacy with a better economic outcome.
Thank you, Dave. And Tak, intelligent surgery, what does that say to you?
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of what Dave is saying. Some of the areas that, just to get a little more specific, that folks have been spending a lot of time are sort of, identifying, what's cancerous and non-cancerous tissue, so that you can, just cut what is necessary to cut. Tracking bleeding, overlays of key either nerves or blood vessels, things like that, to make surgery easier. I would also say that, well, I guess we're going to get into challenges a little bit, but the health economics and the safety efficacy ultimately are going to be super critical, as you're certainly trying to drive towards more favorable outcomes for the patient, the provider, and the system.
Okay. Thank you, Thap. So we've heard sort of quite a broad definition of intelligent surgery. What I haven't heard yet is kind of robotics and AR. Where does that fit in, Dave? I think you have done quite a bit of work in this space, haven't you?
Well, robotics are central to intelligent surgery because they not only help the surgeon perform in certain aspects, they have so much intelligence that can be incorporated into it. It's really incumbent on the companies that are developing these robots to take it to the next step by delivering the information from their systems back to either the HRs, back to administrators, where they're where they're providing information on the procedure itself, the entire incorporation of robotics into more intelligent systems. And that could be the system itself, that could be the application of intelligence within the patient, or that could be within the user or the clinician who's using the system, and giving some biofeedback into their procedure.
I think one of the common themes that we see is that, when we talk about intelligent surgery, there are two steps. One is the device itself, how to make that safer, more intelligent, smarter, more user-friendly, more data-driven. But on the other hand, there is also this communication that's between devices. I mean, in the world of software and electronics world, there is this whole Internet of Things, right? Devices that are talking to each other and communicating with each other. But I think today, by and large, if you go into a surgery suite, every device from every different manufacturer has its own protocol, and they're all kind of like, standalone devices. And I think part of intelligent surgery is also trying to bring all of them onto one platform so that they can start to talk to each other. Otherwise, surgeons have to, if they're using 3 different devices, they're going to be looking at 3 different screens up there. Why can't they all be put together? And that's certainly something that we are very interested in seeing, and hoping that there are companies that are innovative enough to bring about that outcome. Tug, do you share that same vision as well?
Yeah, I think I think that's real. You know, I guess the question is, you know, if you know, as people start to think about, you know, forming entities around this, you know, startup or otherwise, just sort of thinking about the forces that be, you know, whether it be Intuitive or J&J or Medtronic, you know, who's owning sort of the box that's closest to the patient, and sort of, you know, what, you know, your level of sort of, you know, if you're looking at, you know, Porter's 5 forces, how do you think about, you know, where you fit in there, and how much sort of value you can extract from building something like that. But I certainly think it is important. It is critical, and not only, you know, interoperability between the systems inside the operating room, but also with the EHR systems, and you know, bringing in CT scans and ultrasounds from, you know, pre-op and things like that.
Great. I think Tug has begun to kind of talk about some of the technological challenges that we're facing in trying to implement this vision of intelligent surgery. You know, Dave, I think you have some thoughts about that as well. You know, what are the major barriers or technological challenges that's been keeping us from getting to that vision thus far?
Give you a few thoughts on that, but I think the first place where I would follow on is where Tug was just talking about, getting into the EHRs to enable more intelligent systems to integrate with the patient information that's either already been done in pre-surgical planning or incorporated into that patient information is key. And the interoperability between the many different devices that are being used in the ORs, that interoperability with the EHR is key, because the systems have to report back out. We have the capability now, it just needs to be opened and collaborated and collated between the many disparate systems that are not talking to each other. Some of the other challenges are the size of the devices now. As we're getting to smarter devices, they keep incorporating more technology within it, and they could be larger than the keyholes that we're trying to deliver them through in laparoscopy. So when in the past we were doing perhaps 10mm incisions, and now we've gone up to 12mm, and some cameras are accepting 7 and now down to 5mm ports. I think the systems are going to be too large, and the devices or the end effectors in the robotic systems will be too large to incorporate all of the technology that we're trying to build into them. So that has to be key. And then as we're making more intelligent surgeries and intelligent systems, they're going to be more individualized to the patient in preoperative planning. And I think being able to deliver each of those technologies on an individualized patient is going to be tough to achieve through clinicals and validate which devices are appropriate for which patients, and that'll be a long haul.
Certainly, miniaturization is a major challenge, but the good news is, of course, there is new technology every day that's making things smaller, whether in integrated circuitry or in sort of materials engineering. So it's a challenge, but I think it's certainly something that is also viable in the near future. You know, we talk about you know, and so miniaturization, I think it also has 2 aspects to it. One is how to make the devices smaller, so that they can fit even into the smaller spaces, even go up the arterial or venous channels. But also how you can pack more power and more functionality into those devices. So we think about like the pill cam, which is a camera that you can swallow and performs all kinds of diagnostics. I mean, the standard of care today is a dumb camera. But what we're seeing down in the pipeline are a whole bunch of companies that are developing capabilities so that it's not only able to do an imaging, it's able to do testing, it's able to do a whole range of other functions as well. So certainly a lot of exciting things happening in the world of miniaturization. Tug, you mentioned earlier on about sort of the need to get this the adoption, how to get these technologies adopted in the market, and the fact that there are large incumbents there that are, maybe in the way. What hope is there for a startup? I mean, what can they do, and how can they kind of overcome that sort of a hurdle?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, to be honest, I think we haven't made any robotics investments, and actually, the robotic investments have actually largely come from tech firms, and not necessarily from healthcare firms, med device firms, part of that is sort of the sort of safety, efficacy, health economics point of view. And it's just some of the data is coming out now, especially around pelvic stuff, but it's really unclear. There are frankly cardiovascular surgeries that you can do by robots, but they just take longer, and there's probably more safety issues. And so the equation never really worked out. Having said that, the Intuitive has also obviously done amazing. And frankly, as we talk to people, and my view is that the hospitals are buying this, they're buying the products because they want patients to know or think that they're the cutting edge. And I'd say that that's true for the physicians as well. Physicians choose hospitals based on these types of things as well. Going forward, I think it is really important to have for more full-fledged adoption, really clear health economics and safety efficacy, benefits. And I'd say that that's true now. And look, at some point, if there's a change in administration, I would say that's going to become even more acute. And then I would also say that if we want to expand this beyond, the United States, where we spend, 20+% of our GDP on healthcare, if you want to expand it to Europe or other places, Asia, even developing countries, the costs do have to come down. So that's another sort of big challenge. And then as you think about funding startups, there's sort of the categories of startups that are accessories or sort of software logistics type things that work with the incumbent products. And then there's people developing robots on their own for completely new indications. And what I would say is that, there are only a few incumbents that own the robot. And so, it's Intuitive, J&J, and Medtronic soon. And so, you really gotta, convince them to buy your stuff and pay you a lot for it. And that's really hard to do when there's only a few of them. And there really isn't a way for a startup to directly access the market with something that is just, some sort of software or something that relies on someone else's robot. So, if we were to do one, it would more than likely be, building a completely new robot, or, investing in a robot that's fairly far along, but bringing, large, it's fairly capital intensive. If you look at some of these things, there's $500 million of paid in capital on most of these projects. So, we would bring together a lot of capital and push forward a platform, and some place that we felt like we could get some health economic value. That's how we think about it.
So still on the subject of sort of overcoming barriers and marketing and adoption barriers, I think one of the things that Hunniwell does is that we're a little bit contrarian. As a venture capital firm, most VC firms tend to invest across a diversity of space. We're actually investing in a very focused area. In our case, within the GNI, thoracic, endovascular, hepatology, urology space, so that our portfolio companies can enjoy synergies with each other. I think the view is that when you're fighting against a 800-pound gorilla, you really want to have all of the help that you can get, and there's no harm in having companies kind of work and collaborate with each other. And so the idea is that so that they can build scale by helping each other and to a higher level, to a bigger level, before they are IPO'd or sold to a strategic buyer. Dave, I want to ask you on this whole area of sort of overcoming marketing challenges. What does Alira Health have in terms of advice to startups?
You know, I go back to the old saying, it takes a village, and we don't see any one company that's going to deliver all of the intelligent systems that's going to make an entire operative theater work seamlessly and intelligently. So again, we talked about some of the pre-planning imaging that, well, look, we can do two dimension CT and hand that to an orthopedic surgeon, but when they go to perform their implant, do they know what's going on at the time of surgery? Is the patient completely oriented the way they were when they took the CT? And what does it look like right now at this time? Or the same in oncology when you're going to do a tumor resection in the lung. That was 2 weeks ago, and now I've got a patient breathing and moving on the table, and I want some type of real-time CT or fluoro guidance that is not incorporated. Not every OR has a CT in it. So we're looking at the marriage between preoperative imaging and that would have intraoperative capabilities. And that's not going to be done, at least today, from the companies that are delivering robotic systems. So let's keep the robotic systems in where they are. They're expanding. You're looking at more end effectors and more tools to be used in the robots, but they don't also have the implants. And now that the implants are smarter or have different feedback, they're not preparing a knee for the implant. There's so many different components. You have to have interoperability and collaboration to make these better and more amenable to having better, talked about the economic outcomes. We can talk about efficacy, but we also have to look at when he's talking about 20% of the US GDP in healthcare, they have to be economic as well. A lot of the arguments are out the window. You can talk about intuitive, that would be an entire dissertation. And is that cost cheaper, and is it relative to the outcome? Perhaps if you're taking out a prostate, but maybe not in a lap chole, and they can argue that in a different forum. But those are the considerations that everybody has to make.
I think the trend that we're seeing is these robots sort of becoming smaller and more specialized, so that you don't have a $1 million multifunctional robot, because at the end of the day, you're only using one or two of these functions at any one time. So that's certainly what we're seeing. Before I go on to the next question, I just want to make a note that we're looking at a Q&A section, and there are no questions from the floor. I'd like to encourage the audience to fill the question. If there's something that you would like to ask, kind of raise your hand, put something in that, and we will get to you in a minute. Quick question for our panelists. Tuck, you're an investor, and Dave, you're an investment banker and advisor. As you help your clients or help yourself or your clients look for opportunities in this space, what do you look for? What part of this space do you gravitate towards, and what do you look for in a company? Tuck, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think in this space, we would probably be looking for, for intelligent surgery. I would say I would have to take this more broadly. I'll be honest, with Intuitive, Medtronic, and J&J with robots, with surgical robots for GI, it's really hard to bet on even a CMR that's not that far behind. You can see Transenterix, Titan. There's dozens of them, and it's just not super clear how they're going to beat out the incumbents. Intuitive has a massive installed base. Medtronic and J&J have reps and dozens of reps across every hospital system, and so it's going to be really hard for someone new to compete in that space. If they were going to, it would have to be something fundamentally different that would allow for improved health economics. So it'd have to be a fundamentally cheaper system, which isn't great for returns, and then or something that allows you to do some surgery that you weren't able to do before. So there's a company, Vicarious, that has a robot that can sort of do a 180 once they get in, so it's easier to do a ventral hernia. you know, you have to decide if that's a large enough market, but something like that where you're doing something that's fundamentally different. I would also say, you know, look, you kind of have to look at AI and robotics in other spaces, right? Like, you know, we know that there's robots in other spaces, lungs, hair restoration, BPH ablation. There's got to be others. There's opportunities in. You know, I'm going to throw one out there that's completely, you know, it's AI and it's robotics. It's not necessarily surgery, but I think it is interesting. So there's a company working on in vitro fertilization, actually. And so you can imagine that, you know, IVF is actually a massive market in the United States and in other places around the world. And, you know, it's largely sort of, you know, done by technicians who sort of pick the sperm and pick the eggs and stick them together. Well, you know, if you can with AI determine which sperm and which eggs are more viable, and then you can use robots to actually do the pipette insertion, you know, there is a potential for increased efficacy there. So you can have an increased conversion in a highly, you know, expensive, market. And so, you know, that is a place where you can probably provide very clear, health economic value to, you know, people who are willing to cash pay. So that is, you know, and that's sort of going outside the system. And outside of you know what we're currently looking at. I'm just saying that there's probably other places. I think GI surgery is going to be, you know, sort of tough to make investments in right now as far as building a big robot. I think David can probably speak to some of the other accessories.
Yeah, good points, Tak. You know, what we look for people that have two components, either unique value propositions. So Me Too's are just not that interesting anymore. They have to have some type of differentiation versus what's already been incorporated. Certainly trying to go against the behemoths that dominate the space. And then compatibility with either process, procedure, or technologies. So if you're going to disrupt a standard procedure and not be incorporated into the other tools that are being used, they're going to find a much more difficult pathway into the marketplace, regardless of how advanced they are. So if you have something that enhances a robotic surgery by vessel identification, or Tak, I know, had a lot of themes along the line of bleeding identification and determining where the source of bleeding or and enhancing some type of reduction in bleeding. Those have to be incorporated within the current technologies that are being deployed. So we look for the interoperability within the current technologies that are being utilized, as well as something that's unique. You can disrupt, but it has to be within you know, the certain realm that you're disrupting the individual technology, not the entire process.
Thanks, Dave. We now have one question from the field or from the room, and it's coming from none other than my colleague, Richard Fang. And I promise this wasn't a planted question. So Richard, if you're on, you have a question for, I think, all of us, or maybe a comment. Administrator, could you put Mr. Richard Fang on?
Yeah, my question is still, if you look at all those players, either is Intuitive Surgical and other players, J&J, Medtronic, they're all doing similar thing as Defensive will do. In order to, as Ted put it, in order to do things drastically different, how do we do it? I mean, I understand the barrier from the incumbents. I would like the panelists to comment on that. Thank you.
Dave?
I want to be very clear. We don't look at intelligent surgery at Alira as Intuitive, J&J, and Medtronic in laparoscopic robotic systems. Intelligent surgery goes everything from, again, feedback of instruments talking to the EHR, looking at standards of processes and procedures and reporting to administrators. This surgeon is substandard. We need to do training and improvement. These surgeries are going extremely well at your institution, your in GI, but your GYN service is well behind your peers. There's so much that goes into intelligent surgery. If you want to ask how do you disrupt the intuitive, I don't even think that J&J, even with their $4 billion ARS acquisition, or Medtronic now with their release of Hugo, have that completely identified yet. We'll see. They have 6 million surgeries that they've already performed. You have to have procedures done to be authorized to do them in some institution. That's a major disruption. So to even CMR, I think we only see 4 or 5 players in that particular market. However, if we're going to talk just robotics, not even intelligent surgery, we've landscaped over 165 different robotic systems in medical across everything from percutaneous needle biopsy all the way to knee implants. So there's a huge plethora of technologies out there in just robotics. I don't want to just purely comment on how you disrupt the 3 major players in the laparoscopic field right now.
It's for.
But nevertheless, Dave, I think in whatever field, whether robotics or non-robotics, the reality in the medical device industry is that in many of these fields, it's often dominated by 2 or 3 incumbents that are out there. So in the competitive landscape, in the competitive analysis, the competitors are one thing, but who is also driving demand, and how do you get adoption at that end of the scale? I think that's also important. In some of our earlier discussions, Dave, you had some views about who is driving and demanding intelligent surgery today. You want to kind of share with everyone? You're muted, Dave.
There we go. Good. Sorry. Yeah, look, this is a combination of the facilities and the administrators. If we look at what was done in the case of Intuitive, this was driven by the facilities' desire to draw in more patients by advertising and promoting robotic surgery and the benefits of that, not only for, say, prostatectomy, but we're trying to drive that into GYN surgery with hysterectomy and other GYN oncology procedures. Again, that was marketing efforts based on the facilities. The clinicians wanted to use that either the fatigue standing over patients for 7, 8, 10 hours a day, in driving multiple laparoscopic tools over that time. There's a lot of fatigue. Being able to sit down at a system and be able to drive those robotic arms without standing over that operative field is a huge advantage. And then there are certain areas where the talent is not done. It's not that the clinicians aren't talented. They might not be the most advanced laparoscopists compared to some of their peers or competitors down the road for them. And now they're able to perform certain procedures that they were precluded from with their laparoscopic skills, and that afforded them newer skills. So those are some of the demand generators from those who wanted to adopt certain systems. Of course, the payers are quite concerned about, can we make the connection between the outcomes and the economics of those outcomes with the increased spend. There's no doubt that these systems cost more. The payers haven't noticed that as much because there's not a pass-through, so the facilities had to potentially eat the cost of a $1 million, a $2 million piece of capital and the maintenance of that, as well as an increased cost of the tools that go along with it.
Thank you, Dave. So we're coming towards the end of our session, and thank you everybody for joining us. One final word from our panelists. What final word of advice you may have to entrepreneurs who are currently developing a product in the field of intelligent surgery? Tuck, what advice would you give to our entrepreneurs?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd say that for most things in medical devices that we've invested in, you definitely take in KOL feedback but also, ultimately, publish papers on safety and efficacy that are super
Okay, Dave?
critical in adoption. But what I would say is actually in robots, KOL feedback and user feedback is penultimate. So that is ultimately, you need to have a system that is easily adoptable and intuitive for the doctor, part of the pun. I mean, it really does have to be, and that's what differentiates Intuitive from, Transenterix, from Titan, from, so that's what's going to differentiate all these, is actually, how easy it is for the physician to adopt it if they like it.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Todd. 30 seconds, David.
Yeah, beyond the KOL feedback, which is always paramount, ensure that you're talking to the hospital administration as well, and that they have other objectives and goals for the entire outcome and procedure that they're driving. And the intelligent systems now are going well beyond just that limited procedure, and they're looking at the entire outcome as well as the entire operation across the facility. And that's hospital administrators that have different objectives as well. So assure that you're speaking with them.
Thank you, Dave. And at Hunniwell, our take is clinical needs analysis. Everything starts with clinical needs analysis, ends with clinical needs analysis. That's the way to go. So thank you, Chung from NEA and David Uffer from Alira Health. I want to thank you and everyone else who's with us today. We hope that you found our discussions helpful. Just a quick reminder that Hunniwell is also hosting a 7-hour online networking lounge immediately after this. So please feel free to register at our website, www.hunniwell.com, and join us. See you soon, and good luck in the rest of the summit. Hope you enjoy it.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you, guys. It's a great panel.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Daniel.
Thanks.
David, for fascinating talk. Really insightful thoughts. Very interesting presentation and conversation. So I would like to remind to our guests that you can follow the agenda at f50.io/summit. You can look all the background and bios of the speakers and all the guests and the participants. And you can also follow the presentation sessions on the YouTube, and those conversations will be available on YouTube. And please subscribe on LinkedIn and YouTube and social media channels.